Okay, I want to play a video clip from North Shipping 2011. You'll know this person. Play the clip.
This is going to be the holy grail for all of us, and that's remote monitoring and remote operating of vehicles, of the drill vessels themselves. As an equipment manufacturer, I want to make equipment that doesn't need people running it. You know, we can actually run it from the shore. You don't have anybody out there.
You know, I have the feeling that Pete Miller didn't get many Christmas cards from all of you who have run big crews and vessels here. But he raises a very interesting point, you know, about trying to make things more automated. And I want to get your thoughts, Professor Lane, on this. How far off are we? You gave us some fabulous sort of concepts of what can be, especially with the deep water enabler. How far are we from this becoming a reality? You know?
It's a reality now, and there are autonomous vehicles being used today in the oil field for inspection, and soon they'll be used for repair and maintenance. In the business plans of companies sitting in this room, you know, within the next 5 years, we'll have autonomous platforms, vehicles that are doing manipulation in the ocean. And I'd like to say a few words about disruption, if I may,
Sure.
about how disruption happens. One of the questions we were asked was about, you know, where do we see the next areas for growth in the offshore maritime segment? You know, we've talked a lot about wind, we've talked a lot about oil and gas. There are other segments here we haven't said so much about, to do with the environment, to do with security, and indeed to do with things like carbon capture and storage. And what you'll see is those are niche markets compared to the large sort of giants of the oil and gas business. But those are places where in those relatively niche markets, new technologies are being developed. And that's where the disruption starts. It's a classic model that we've seen in the computer industry and in many other applications. And what we're seeing is technology, for example, coming from the security world of mine warfare and autonomous vehicles. That's now mapping directly across into oil and gas. And people are starting to think about the oil field as a smart space, where it's not just about the robots, it's about the people. Obviously, you know, autonomy is all about the operator at the end of the day. You know, you're right, somebody has to make a decision whether it's working well or not. And that's linked to data. It's linked to the data about what's happening in the oil field and remote operations. So it's a whole new space that we're working in of technology.
But I think what Pete was really talking about here, and you kept mentioning the word vessels, it's already here. I think what he's talking about is everything being done onshore.
Right.
Okay? How far are we from that, and what's the ramifications for all these people sitting in this audience?
We could do it now, and there are examples of remote operations, you know, from the beach. You know, I go to BP and the Greater Plutonio Operations Centre in Sunbury, off West Africa, and they're not doing everything remotely there, but it's already here now. There's an element of risk associated with that, and it's about adoption, actually. People have to be ready to adopt it. And rather than taking it in one great big step, you know, it comes in a series of baby steps. And I think we're on the way. What's less clear is the rate at which that adoption will take place.
Gunnar, yeah, Hege.
We have, I think today, hundreds and hundreds of cars driving around in Boston area in the United States unmanned. And they are talking about in the aircraft industry to have one captain aboard a big airplane, because if he or she is not functioning anymore, they can take over the control of the plane from the earth. So I think we are there today. It is more an organizational issues. In 2015-16, there will be 50% more rigs in the North Sea, 4,500 more employees these companies need. We don't manage to get all these people that fast. That's why automation is so important. But we need to sit down with the labor unions and things like that. It will change the way they work today, but it will create a lot of new interesting work, different kind of work for the future. So I think you can move quite a lot of what you do out on a ship today onshore. And what is so exciting about this is that people that are maybe 55, 60, 65, they can sit on shore with all their experience with younger, less experienced people on board a ship. If you have a problem, if there is something that is unusual, they can get the onshore people and they can serve a lot of vessels out there. So it is, the technology is there, and then we have to get the people move with the technology.
Yes, and I 100% agree with you, because actually we did remote drilling in '94 We demonstrated it during the ONC in Stavanger, and we remotely controlled the Ulrig that was 10 kilometers away. So the technology is there. The challenge is the people and the mindset of the people to actually trust the machine so that I push a button and it's happening. So it's the people that's the issue, it's not the technology. But we do have a big, it's actually helping that some of our gray-haired people are getting out and we get the Nintendo generation in because they're used to this. They've done this for years. So yes, it's good with experience. Yes, I love to have them onshore so that they can help the young guys and girls out there. But we do need to get rid of so many people offshore.
Anyone with gray hair, leave now. Okay. I want to get your perspective, Simon, on this because you are building different types of vessels. Gunvar actually sees it as an opportunity if it's handled properly, where you can actually build on experience and do all sorts of things and work in new ways. Do you see automation as an opportunity or a threat, especially if it goes onshore? Because potentially what that will mean is fewer vessels in the sea.
Yes, as a builder point of view, we also pay attention to, because China is a teenage in this industry. China closed the doors since a very long time. Today, more and more coming to the international market. As builder, China is becoming also competitive workshop for the world. And we are talking about how to have the building safely, respect the environment and good cost. China, you cannot miss China. China is important. But we are just builder. So what we need to do is follow the technology and follow technology, including how to building the ships and building strategy and all this kind of thing. 10 years ago, I come into this industry with idea I should using equipment intensive instead of labor intensive. Because that time I said, China will not be cheap country anymore. But today is the truth. So I think today China is still teenage for technology. It's too early talking about innovation for this ocean space technology for China yet, but it's coming. And we are builder, we just follow you and to be good workshop for you.
Christina, just a quick thought you may have on this, the automation versus the vessel approach.
I think we are adapters in this field, and of course, when you move to operations, we also work remotely already, and we need to increase that. When we move the wind farms 100 kilometers offshore, and from a cost perspective, it's simply not possible to have a manned platform out there.
Okay.
I think we need to address the fact that is reality. Yes, we will operate remotely. That adds some new sets of roles and responsibilities. It sets some new restrictions and some new requirements on the way we operate and organize. So I think that's a topic that needs to be part of the technology approach that we have. How does this implicate changes on organizations, on individuals, roles, responsibilities, how we interact, and how we communicate? And that's an important thing to address in the drive for remote control.
Does it mitigate risk or does it increase risk?
It probably does both. I mean, it mitigates risk in the fact that you don't have people on board, so obviously you will not have fatalities if an incident happens. It also adds risk because you do not have the best barrier in place, the human with all the skills. So I think it does both.
Yeah. Professor?
Yeah, I disagree with that. I think it takes away risk. That's part of the point of doing it. I think on the vessel point, the dynamics of the vessel market will change as we have more automation and more autonomy sitting on the seabed and operating in the seabed. It's inevitable. What it will do is make individual vessels more productive, and it'll make individual vessels perhaps need to be less capable in terms of their ability to position, for example, because they don't have to be holding station the whole time. So I think there's some dynamic changes, but we will always need ships. And what's interesting to see is how, as the whole ocean space develops, we will need more ships. How will that be tensioned by the need for less ships as we have more automation? And that's a dynamic we have to wait and see.
Gunvar, let me ask you this. Is the smart money is always thinking ahead in terms of technology? If we move towards more automation because it mitigates risks, if we take the professor's position, and you don't need as many personnel on board or you don't need as many ships, then do the type of vessels we have for the offshore industry, do they go into new areas? For instance, maybe working with carbon capture or some of the other areas that the professor talked about? Yeah.
I totally agree with the professor that it mitigates risks. But yes, I think there is a big opportunity lying out there. You have offshore wind. We use our technology in the oil and gas sector now to go into the offshore wind. The only problem with that area is that it is, as you said, very much a policy making thing. So it depends on the budget of each country whether they can support it 1 year more or not. You have the deep sea mining where you can take a lot of the technology we have developed for the offshore industry and go further in that direction. You have the offshore aquaculture. I think you will see, you have seen only the beginning of the fish farms today. And we are going to be 9 billion, wasn't what Sturla said in 2020. So we need more food. And that is also an area where we can take our technology. And then you have ocean mapping and monitoring of marine resources and the environment. So there are a lot of new places we can take our technology and expand into new areas.
Yeah, Christina.
I just think purpose-built is nice. Purpose-built is nice, but it needs to be built for many, many purposes. So in general, deploying the seabed and deploying the offshore, you need to be able to do that with the same type of equipment. And then you're also less, you could say, dependent on one industry as such. And it is an area that will evolve.
But you pointed it out in your remarks today. You know, in your industry, your government dependent on subsidies in many ways. And so
we're working on that.
You're working on that, okay. But how realistic is it that, you know, both offshore wind and solar will be able to survive without subsidies? You talked about, you know, having to bring down the cost of electricity. How realistic is it, and can you get your cost model right so that can happen? And how will that impact the suppliers that you're working with in terms of the offshore vessel suppliers? Yeah.
I think those two questions. So I think to answer the first one, I think we are working on it. And I said we just installed the first 6 megawatt turbine. And to get the cost down to a competitive level that we have assessed to be 100 euros in the first phase here, we will need even larger turbines. Then we need less cables and less foundations. And that's a good and efficient deployment of the offshore seabed. And whether that's fast enough, it takes a lot of dedication and a lot of effort. And if there are not some brave decisions made out there, we will not get the volume needed to bring down the costs. So that's probably the biggest challenge.